Hi everybody, I'm Sarah Holmes and I am going to be taking your lecture today. I've been at Liverpool Hope for over 5 years now, teaching mainly level C and level I. This year I'm only level C, so I haven't met you yet, but I'm going to be teaching you today all about this topic of spiritual well-being in early childhood. And this is a topic Zoe's asked me to look at with you because it's something that I've done a lot of research on, and it's one of my kind of specialist areas. So I'm really enjoying sharing this with you today. Hopefully you'll find it interesting too. Feel free to ping me an email if you want to after the lecture and ask any questions or anything like that. So first off, I wanted to start to think about what is spiritual well-being. What does it look like? What does it mean? And then how can we foster it really in our early childhood settings that we're involved with? They're the aims for our session today. Firstly, a little bit of background, because I don't want to presume that spiritual development and spirituality is something that you're all familiar with. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes at the very beginning of the lecture defining that, looking at it. What might it actually look like? And so first off, I want to make it really, really clear. Spirituality, as I'm talking about it today, is distinct and separate from religion. So perhaps some people may express their spirituality through a particular religious pathway. They might opt for a religion such as Christianity or Buddhism or Islam. But actually, spirituality is not the same as religion. And so what is it then? Well, it's all about someone's inner life, their interior life, what goes on internally. But thinking particularly about this kind of sense of a search for meaning or purpose and an expression of relatedness. So as I'm kind of moving through my life day by day, what do I feel, pardon me, in terms of my sense of purpose, in terms of my sense of meaning, and my kind of exploring and trying to grapple with that and work out what my role is in the universe? Thinking about transcendence. So how aware am I of a transcendent being? What about immanence and ultimate values? These is the sort of sense of a bigger picture, a broader thing than just me sitting here in this room now. It's this sense that there is something else, and I want to explore that. I want to engage with that. But also thinking about identity, and very much what is an individual's identity, and how is that expressed through their spirituality and so on. Perhaps it's helping an individual to be more aware of their own identity, but also to be aware of the identity of others, and also in terms of expressing and developing their changing identity as they go through life. Thinking about a connection to something greater. So all of these things that I've just been saying above, about a sense of transcendence and ultimate values, integrity as well, all speaking about this sense of connecting to something greater, something that's beyond what we can see and feel and grasp tangibly in our midst right now, and a sense of being aware of that. And so thinking about spiritual experiences in the mundane and the everyday, particularly thinking about children. But actually this probably, even this slide could apply to all ages as well. So in terms of spiritual experiences, so people report having spiritual experiences while they're running. I remember one lady saying to me once that running was just her way of connecting with the world. And when she ran, she just felt like in a different place. And it kind of moved her and made her feel really emotional and so on. So for her, running was a very spiritual experience. Singing, particularly part, pardon me, singing with others, being part of a group, that kind of corporate sense there. Creating something. Many people find, who are artistic, find creating and crafting and so on to be a very moving spiritual experience. Painting similarly, playing a game with a friend, enjoying a juicy orange, just that sense of savoring an experience. Rolling in the autumn leaves. I don't think I've ever rolled in the autumn leaves, but I love kind of walking along and kicking the leaves and hearing that kind of crunchy sound, just seeing them, not when they've got all wet and soggy, but that kind of time when they're all nice and crunchy and fresh, reflecting on a dream, being captivated by a sunset. I think for me, I just love nature. I love being out in nature. And there's much been written about spirituality in nature and the connections there. But I just love being outdoors, and I just love looking at a scene. I live near the coast, so looking out at the sea and the coastline, but also sunsets, all those kind of things just really help me to feel that sense of an awareness of a greater power, an awareness of there being a greater being around me. And so when we think of children, young children, all of these things apply. And so as you'll see, as we walk through this lecture together, actually for young children, spiritual experiences are very much potential to be part of their life. And so whereas perhaps we as adults put limitations on children in terms of how well they can do maths, or how well they can verbally express themselves, or how well they can cook the dinner, or how independent they are, those kind of things have limitations on them because they are children. Actually, what you'll see, I think, through what we're talking about is that many spiritual experiences, or much of spirituality, does not have limitations which prevent children from experiencing these things. So let's look a bit more at this. So more kind of spiritual experiences, moments of awe and wonder, the afterlife. There's a book by Tobin Hart, which is in the slide. The slide right at the end of this lecture has got various books and things listed that you can look up if you're interested, if you want to find out some of the references that I talk about, but also if you want to do further reading. So that's listed at the end. And there's a book he wrote about the spiritual life of children. And he talked in there about how some children talk about the afterlife and experience spirituality through that. But in terms of ultimate questions, now we know, I think, that children, we've possibly all experienced children's questioning and that kind of sense of why this, why that, why perhaps things about what they're permitted or allowed to do. Why can I not have 25 biscuits before my dinner? But also questions about why is the sun that color? Why does snow melt? And those kind of things. But then I think there's greater questions which perhaps help children to connect spiritually. So questions such as, why does my parent love me? Or why does it feel good when I care for someone or do something nice for someone? Or what happens when somebody dies? So some of these kind of ultimate questions that children have help them to connect and explore in this spiritual activity. Religious experience, as I said, is one way that people connect spiritually. And so for some people, they connect spiritually through a particular religious tradition. For others, perhaps they explore a range of traditions. And for some, spirituality is not linked with religion at all. And then also there are perhaps what we might call darker spiritual experiences as well there. And things like ghosts and those type of things, and spiritual beings and spirits and so on. So spirituality in children. So we're going to look a bit now about what it might look like in terms of spirituality in early childhood. So we see perhaps a sense of interconnectedness. So this is a list of things that Rebecca Nye and David Hay wrote a book called The Spirit of the Child. And it's very detailed, very in-depth, looking at what does the child's spirit look like. And it isn't connected with a particular religious tradition, that book. Again, it's a very broad and all-encompassing look at the spiritual life of children. And these are some of the things that they listed and detailed as what they had observed and noticed as they looked at the spirit of children. So a sense of interconnectedness, this sense of being connected with a whole load of different people, different places, different things, different spheres in the world around them, a sense of personal well-being. And this is what I want us to think about today, because in Level R, you look a lot at well-being of children. And so we're thinking particularly today about what does spiritual well-being look like? And so this sense of a sense of personal well-being, this sense that a child feels that they're okay and that they can sort of ground themselves in spiritual experiences, and that helps them to feel well, that helps them to have a good sense of well-being. This thing about cross-cutting cultural encounters. So it's about cutting through perhaps some of the cultural barriers that are there, and helping children to cut through that and to encounter things that perhaps they wouldn't have been able to otherwise, but through spiritual encounters they are able to. Finding meaning in different circumstances. So perhaps if children are finding things really hard, the pandemic is a classic thing. Not a classic thing, but it's a good example of how perhaps children can find some sense of meaning in the circumstances that they're in, or perhaps a child who is lonely, feels isolated, a child who is ill. Actually, they can look within themselves, they can look out of themselves, they can look into the spiritual realm and find some kind of sense of meaning in the circumstances that they have. But also this sense of competition and cooperation, and that kind of tension of wanting to compete, but also wanting to cooperate with those around them, wanting to cooperate with perhaps transcendent beings that they are connected with, and so on. And very much this sense of relating to the environment. So this thing of how does the child connect with their sort of surrounding environment, in terms of their sphere. So perhaps that's people, the people who are around them, but perhaps it's also the places that are around them. Perhaps it is caring for the environment in terms of looking after the world, but also relating to the environment in terms of people and places and so on. And so, as I said, Hay and Nye talked about this relational consciousness. And they said that this is where spirituality involves a deep sense of the whole, one's relationship with self and with everything that is other than self. And so children are, on the one hand, have a good kind of relationship with themselves. They're kind of aware of who they are. They're connected with that. They have a deep sense of who they are. They're not tossed and shaped and thrown by things that happen, because they have that deep sense, that kind of gut security, if you like, this deep sense of the whole, of who they are and their identity and their sense of self-worth within that. But also being deeply connected with things that are not themselves, so being connected deeply with those that are around them. And so this is what they talk about in terms of relational consciousness, this sense of being conscious. It's not a subconscious thing, it's very much a conscious, deliberate, intentional connection with oneself and with the beyond as well. But also they talk in their book about mystery sensing and awareness sensing and value sensing. So actually the child's ability to be open and attentive to mysteries that are around them. So things like a sunset, you know, that they can look and see a sunset and kind of sense that and be open to that and be connected with that, because they have this relational consciousness. They have this kind of conscious awareness that they want to connect with that kind of thing. So very different to a child who is passive and perhaps sees a sunset and just doesn't really care and just continues on their way, just does not notice at all. And part of that then is awareness sensing. So what is going on around the child? So there's kind of, you may have come across mindfulness, which is partly connected with this in terms of kind of deliberately and intentionally sensing things that are around. So I might sit in this room and think, oh, what can I smell? What's that lovely smell? Oh, it's some flowers there. Or what can I hear? I can hear at the moment very quietly the kind of pitter patter of rain on the window, but otherwise it's really quite quiet. And so I could sit and quietly enjoy that quietness, which for me, in a busy household with lots of kids, nice quiet, but also perhaps tastes and touch and other things. What are the kind of the senses? What awareness is? How aware can I be of the senses that are around me? and that I'm feeling. And value sensing as well. So what are my values and how aware am I of those? And so these are all aspects of what Rebecca and I and David Hay talk about in terms of relational consciousness and a child's kind of connection in that spiritual way. And very much so, a lot of the writers who talk about children's spirituality talk about this sense that it's a natural human disposition. And so here we have one writer who talks about a dynamic quality that all people are born with and which continually seeks expression through a person's life. So very much the sense that all people, it's a universal trait, this spiritual side of people. And I think throughout history, perhaps because it's been kind of muddied and mixed up with a particular religious tradition, one or another, that actually people perhaps want to close off that side and say, cut off perhaps an awareness of one's spiritual well-being. But actually, here we see that all people are born with this. And actually, people are the spiritual side of people is continually seeking expression throughout a person's life. And here David Hart, who I talked about earlier, says that he views humankind as spiritual beings who have human experiences rather than human beings who have occasionally spiritual experiences. So very much he's saying that actually spiritual beings is very much the heart of who we are and the essence of who we are, really. And so in terms of children, we need to be aware of this, that if we're kind of shutting that off or not paying attention to children's spirituality, actually what effect does that have on them? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And Elaine Champagne here talks about the human cannot be separated from the spiritual because actually people embody spirituality. So very much we have this sense that comes through in a lot of the writing about spirituality, that it's this natural human universal disposition. So if we were delivering this lecture live, I would pause for a moment and ask you these questions. So what I want you to do is to actually do that, to in a moment when I say to pause the video for about 2 minutes and to get out a piece of paper and a pen and to think about these questions. What do you think it means to be spiritually healthy? So I've talked so far, kind of given a bit of background about what spirituality is, where we might see spiritual experiences. I've talked about how it's a natural disposition and so on. But what do you think it might mean to be spiritually healthy? And also, what is spiritual well-being? What does that mean? What does it look like? What does it mean? So pause your video for a couple of minutes, jot some thoughts down, and have a think about that. So hopefully you've had time to have a little ponder about spiritual health and well-being. And what we're going to do now is to watch a clip together off YouTube. So I'll just find this. And this is talking about what is spiritual health. So I'll just share this with you now. Large. Here we go.
What is spiritual health? Spiritual health is one of the 8 components of total health. At first glance, many believe spiritual health solely refers to religious affiliation. However, while religious affiliation has the tendency to greatly impact spiritual well-being, they are not the same thing. Spiritual health refers to possessing meaning and purpose in life, having a clear set of beliefs, and living in accordance to your morals, values, and ethics. Essentially, it means understanding and having a clear definition of what is right and wrong and living according to this understanding. Like each element of health, spiritual health greatly impacts and influences the other components. For example, if you did something that goes against your belief system, like lied to your parents or stole something from the locker room, the guilt and shame associated with these actions has the power to greatly deteriorate your mental and emotional state. Another connection is your social health, as the people within your social network can greatly influence your beliefs and values. Friends, family members, and coworkers can either strengthen existing frameworks or initiate new understanding. This peer pressure can have both positive and negative effects on your life. As you begin to understand the powerful role your spiritual health plays within the total health framework, you realize that it is vitally important to develop spiritually healthy habits. A few of these habits include choosing friends who uphold similar values and beliefs, making it easy to make positive choices, being intentional about aligning your thoughts and actions to what you believe is wrong and right, regularly and intentionally evaluating your identity and asking yourself if it truly connects to your purpose and meaning. In conclusion, spiritual health is fundamental to your health and happiness as it influences your moods and stress levels and helps guide important occupational, intellectual, financial, and social decisions. For these reasons, it is vital that you intentionally enhance your spiritual well-being as it powerfully connects to your total health and happiness.
Okay, so hopefully that was an interesting video, obviously aimed more at adults, but gives you a sense of the importance of spiritual well-being and a sense of being aware of that, of spiritual well-being and so on. So let's see if I can share my screen again. We'll go back to the PowerPoint. And we'll start to consider now how this might apply in an early years setting and how specifically that may be addressed. So here we have, you may have looked at this already, or perhaps you'll look at this later on in the course, but I'm sure at some point you will look at this. We usually do as part of Level I. And this is the childhood well-being, a brief overview from Loughborough University. And what it is in box 1, I've kind of pulled this bit out of here. I'm not quite sure which page it is actually there. But go back to there. This is a very extensive document that talks about children's well-being generally, and as has been shown already in that clip, actually spiritual well-being has a real strong sense and part to play within that. So we see here where the arrow is pointing. There's a few things here. I'll just click off the arrow there. Keeping safe and feeling secure. This is understood in relation to personal safety, feeling secure within families and global safety. But you can see how spirituality and a sense of awareness and support of a child's spirituality would help them to feel safe and secure too. And then the next point here, having a positive sense of self, including being valued by others and having a positive self, taking time out, having your own space to reflect. And so this sense of allowing children to have space and time to kind of reflect and to have awareness of others, to think about themselves, have a positive sense of self, is very fundamental to a child's well-being. And so really key that we consider this in terms of how can we as early childhood professionals support children's spiritual health and well-being. Now, Fisher wrote an awful lot about this topic of spiritual health, and you can find in the reference list at the end some information about that. No, sorry, not some information, but the reference to his work. And here I've just put a few points. So he argued that spiritual health is exhibited by the extent to which people live in harmony within relationships in each of these 4 different domains, which I'll talk about now, of spiritual well-being. And he talked about these 4 different domains. So the personal domain, communal domain, environmental domain, and transcendental domain. And you can see in brackets some of the information there. If I just click onto the next screen, I think it gives us a bit more information there, a bit more about it. And so we see very much here this sense of personal well-being. So if I go back here, this personal domain, which is a sense of the child's connections with oneself, their sense of meaning and purpose, their values in life, self-esteem, self-awareness, self-identity, and so on. And here, as he's gone into it more in table 1, we see this sense of an awareness of life's mysteries, appreciating life as it happens, and so on. And so I don't know if you've kind of perhaps seen children on 2 extremes. You might look at a child on one extreme, like I said earlier, who's very passive. Perhaps they just don't enjoy anything in life. Perhaps you could give them any gift, you could give them any joyous experience, and they're just going to not enjoy. They're not going to be open or explore if there are things to wonder. things that opportunities to have awe experiences, they're quite sort of passive and unengaged, disengaged with these types of experiences. That's on the one end. But on the opposite extreme, perhaps you have a child who has a very strong sense of their self, a very strong sense of identity and self-esteem, and this gives them the security to go off and to explore, to ponder life's mysteries, to be aware of things, to appreciate experiences that they have, and to enjoy things, to have this zest for life, as it's listed here, to celebrate significant moments. And so this is what Fisher talks about in terms of the personal domain, and how children would have a good sense of health, spiritual health and well-being in the personal domain. So that's that aspect. But then he talks also about the communal domain, and this involves their connections with other people, perhaps in terms of morality. So what is their moral understanding? What do they understand about sharing and caring, but also about kind of other moral standards which we tend to hold in society? How do they connect through those morals, but also in terms of a meaning, purpose and values in life? Sorry, I've gone onto the wrong line there. Sorry, also in terms of culture and love and justice, that sense of fairness and rightness and justice. And they want to kind of fight for that in the communal sphere, in all of the connections that they encounter, both locally and also further afield. They have a sense of hope and a sense of faith in humanity, the goodness. They see goodness all around them, and that sense there is in the communal domain. And so if we look here at table 2, again, some aspects that he's pulled out here in terms of justice, honesty, experiencing drama and art, trust between individuals is a really key and important thing here. And I think we could probably all say that we've seen evidence of perhaps children who have a very low sense of trust of others because of perhaps experiences that they've had in their life. But then on the opposite extreme, the lovely way that children, particularly young children, do trust so openly and so willingly. And so actually a child who is open and willing to trust, they are forgiving between themselves and other individuals. When things happen, they just forgive. They don't hold grudges. They have this sense of honesty and justice and kind of hope and faith and trust in humanity. And so those things would be exhibits and examples and evidence, pardon me, of a good sense of spiritual health and well-being in the communal domain. Then if we'll have a little look at the environmental domain. So Fisher talked about the sense of awe and wonder. So that sense of standing on a mountaintop and looking down at the breathtaking view and just going, wow. Or similarly with a sunset or a starlit sky. Or some people feel a sense of awe when they go into a building like a cathedral and they just look up and they just think, wow. Or even when they see like a feather tumbling through the sky, or these kind of things bring a sense of awe and wonder. And so for children who are able to stop and appreciate that and be aware of that and sense that, this again shows a good sense of their spiritual health and well-being, and being connected with that. And other aspects that he's talked about here in the table 3. So appreciating the natural environment, moments of solitude, actually being able to sit and to be quiet and to have space and to not feel that they've always got to be constantly busy and on the go and that they get bored all the time, but actually that ability to have moments of solitude, to appreciate beauty, but also to have responsibilities, to take responsibility in the environment that they're living in and to have a role to play within that, and to admire something within their environment. And then the 4th point is this transcendental domain. And this is the relationship with something or someone beyond the human level. And so here in table 4, down here on the bottom right, often this realm is more looking at perhaps kind of a religious system that children or individuals, adults, may root their spirituality in. So a religious belief, belonging to a faith community, perception of living as a response to God, personal relationship with God, and I can't read that one because of my Zoom screen. Oh, there we are. Reverence to God and admiring God. So that sense of connecting with another being there. So these are all, as we see on the screen now, 4 of the kind of different aspects, the traits, if you like, that Fisher talks about as being markers of health and well-being spiritually in a child. And so he talks about how we could measure that, how we could look at that, how we could observe these things in children, and also therefore then we can think about how we can foster them and encourage them. And of course, we're particularly interested in how we can do that in our early years settings. So a few quotes for us to kind of think about now on the next few slides. So thinking within that idea of Fisher, of a child's spiritual health and well-being, what is the role that others have to play? And so Hay and I talked about this. Discussion about the child's sense of relationship to others often forms a bridge to and from the child-God context. So often what they're saying is that actually others do have a role to play. It's not simply that children are spiritual beings, or we're all spiritual beings, and therefore everyone can just kind of go and experience that. But actually they talk about others as forming that bridge of helping children to find a sense of connecting with others, or connecting with God, or whatever being that may be. And Ingersoll also emphasized that participation in the worship life of a congregation, so here we have a faith community being important, is found to have a positive influence on a child's spiritual development. And so here we're seeing that for a child's spiritual health and well-being, it cannot be in solitude only and independent and isolation, but actually there needs to be a sense of community, a sense of connecting, and perhaps if that's in the Christian tradition, having kind of a church connection and a worship life there. And obviously this is quite impacted at the moment through COVID, because we're finding, of course, that children and all individuals are very isolated. And so this sense of a communal corporate worship and a faith community is actually really challenged and really difficult to achieve and to be part of at the moment because of all of the restrictions. And then Mercer here talked about the idea of children being apprentices, going through full access to participation in the community. And so whatever kind of faith community children are part of, whatever community generally children are part of, if we can view them as apprentices and have this sense of role models, but allowing them to be full participants, to have full access within that community, actually that enables them very much so to explore and to develop, to experiment with their spirituality and their identity formation and their self-esteem and self-worth and all these things. So Mercer very much talks about the value of seeing children as apprentices and allowing them to participate in that way. And Fisher here, again with some other authors, very much made the point. So those 4 areas that I talked to you about, the 4 domains of spiritual well-being, they're not in isolation. So we cannot simply say that if I just whiz back to them here, we can't say, okay, we're only going to look at a child's personal spiritual well-being, or we're only going to look at how they connect with God and so on, because actually what Fisher is saying is that all 4 of them are interconnected and interrelated, meaning that spiritual health is enhanced by developing positive relationships in each of the domain. And so Fisher would very much say, if we go back to this slide, that actually as practitioners, as adults in whatever sphere we're working with children, actually we must look at all 4 of the domains and think about how can we help children in each of the 4 domains to develop their relationships in each of those aspects. I've got here some other sources that you could look up and investigate if you want to do some more reading. So Hart here, I mentioned The Secret Spiritual Word of Children, really fascinating stories that he's got there. Gurian, The Soul of the Child, lovely book, all about kind of the core identity of children. Kate Adams there wrote The Unseen Worlds and really looked through the lens of the child at this whole topic. And I've already talked a little bit about The Spirit of the Child David Hay and Rebecca Nye there. I want now to just have a quick look through with you. I'll stop my screen share at one of the papers which we're going to be delving into a bit more in our tutorial. And so if I share the screen with you, here we go. This has been recommended to you as a recommended reading, and it's a really, really fascinating paper here by Tony Yoid. I don't know how you say his name. I've never known. I've only ever written it down. That's the first time I've had to say it, I think. So you can find the link hopefully on Moodle there. And basically what he looks at here is teachers making sense of young children's spiritual development. So we're really starting to look now moving into the kind of early years sector and how teachers may look at this. So you can take a deeper look at this when you read this in your own time and delve into a bit more in the tutorial. But there are sections here. How can we research young children's spiritual development? And it's really, really interesting here what he talks about here. So you can look through the different ways that he's talking about how it can be researched. And then he talks about his empirical work, how he did research this in the school setting. And we see here, he visited each school for 10 days within a three-week period, conducting 3 semi-structured discussions with teachers and observing as unobtrusively as possible what happened in the classroom. And so looking at those things there. So really fascinating piece of work, quite a thorough thing. And then he talks about the key issues there and the dilemmas and some of the kind of key emerging themes that came out. So you can read about those there. It's quite a nice, easy to read paper. So hopefully you can access that nicely. What the teachers' responses showed. So here, the kind of his key research findings there. Really interesting, very fascinating to each of us who are involved in the early years sector. But then also looking here, how does the empirical work contribute to a new understanding of spiritual development? And looking there at things that we can learn. Here we see the implications for teachers. But of course, that might be for early years settings too. And how can we incorporate this sense of spiritual fostering and support of children in our settings. So that's just a very quick overview at the journal article, which you can have a little bit look at, have more of a look at to delve into this topic a bit more deeply. Back to the PowerPoint. Here we are. So another thing for you to think about. Holder here talked about children's spirituality, but not their religious practices were strongly linked to their happiness. And again, in the tutorial, there's a clip for you to watch, very much looking at this, at how a sense of a child's spirituality and spiritual health actually very much strongly connects with their sense of happiness and mental health, well-being, and so on. Just also talked about this. There is a need for children to be viewed as active participants in church rather than passive recipients. So that's connecting back to the kind of the participants and active agents of children. Here we read this from Powell. Is it positive that children are disconnected from a religious framework? Does this provide greater freedom of spiritual expression for them? Children feel pressure from parents, teachers, and themselves to perform constantly. They do not depend on us to give them spirituality. In fact, they have important spiritual capacities rarely found in adults. We as adults, especially parents and children, need to recognize, protect, and develop these capacities of the children in our care. So going back to one of the points at the beginning about how actually spirituality is innate, it's a natural expression that each of us have, a natural part, an intrinsic part of being a human. Here Powell is saying children don't need us to give that to them. However, we can recognize that and protect that spirituality in children. So there's quite a lot written in David Hart, all about kind of about helping children to recognize and to see and to value these things that are happening in their daily life, so that children will continue to be open to those things. Because the flip side of that is that if we never talk about spiritual feelings or encounters or experiences, actually these things will become a taboo subject and never talked about and closed away. And also children will never really understand those things and be able to verbalize them. So as adults, our role then really is to help children to recognize these things, connect with them, protect these things, and support children in it. Ellison talked about the notion of spiritual well-being as being described as the visible expression of an individual's underlying spiritual health. And so here we have this sense that spiritual health is perhaps a little bit hidden, but we can see their spiritual well-being as what is visible and kind of expressed through their daily life, the way they live their life, the way they encounter things. And so we can see that as practitioners. Back to Francis, he highlighted that the idea of spiritual well-being incorporates the idea of health alongside the spiritual. So very much we're getting this sense of the health and well-being, the wholeness, the nurturing is so key and so critical in our early years settings. These writers similarly viewed it as an indication of one's spiritual health, but also conveyed a sense of an individual's quality of life in the spiritual dimension. And so how can we as adults ensure that children have a good quality of life in this spiritual dimension? So that's the kind of finishing question for you. How can we do that? And as those working in early years settings, how can we do it in the early years settings? How can we ensure that children have space and freedom and openness to express and to explore the spirituality that is already intrinsic in their life? And so here we have a few other references that you could read a little bit more of if you're interested. Super. Well, we'll leave it there, but do feel free to get in touch with me. My details are on the department website if you wanted to ask any questions or discuss this any further.